This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman.
And Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod.
And we are back in the dark room. I am Brad Kelly. This is Kevin Kautzman. Kevin is holding up our mascot. What is this guy's name? Larry the Latte.
Larry the Latte.
Yeah,
this podcast is powered by stuffed animals, coffee, and the discourse.
And the discourse. For people who haven't tuned in before, a dark room episode is where we sort of return to the scene of a crime. We go back and further develop our ideas on a subject that we have done the deep dive on. Some of these subjects, the wealth of information and interpretation and historical context is bottomless. And in this case, we're talking about Edgar Allan Poe. There is no end to how much Poe one can talk, frankly. And in the dark room format, we bring in a special guest who, has some particular insights, maybe some thoughts that we're not aware of. Somebody who can help us understand our subject more. Kevin and I, we do our best, but we're just a couple of boys from the Midwest. We barely know what we're talking about.
Just a couple of Poe boys.
That's right.
We're going to keep talking about Poe until Wallabeck comes on.
You go.
That's the plan.
That'd be great. So to that end, we have brought back a much returned guest. One of my favorite people to have on the show has been with us, since nobody listened to Art of Darkness. So that's really cool.
He was one of the first 20 listeners.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
Yeah,
I definitely I listened to the first podcast. I listened to the Burroughs podcast.
Okay.
You guys have so much when it was released that you have so much chagrin over. Great job on the Redux, by the way.
Thanks. Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, so that's the voice of Aldous Asterion, the mastermind behind the fantastic Forest of Symbols podcast. If you like Art of Darkness, you will like Forest of Symbols. I guarantee it. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that. So first off, Aldous, how you doing, man? It's been a little while. I can't remember.
I'm doing good. Well, it was Borges, and I can't believe it's been nearly a year. About a month from now, it'll be a year since we did that episode. Unbelievable.
Yeah, wild. Yeah. That was a great one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I was supposed to have a 4-hour Forest of Symbols that I was gonna promote. It should have been done, but my laptop died. I've gone computerless for the last 2 weeks, so I'm on a brand new laptop today. So it's coming.
Okay. No, when that drops, we'll definitely promote that. And we can find another reason for you to come back on for sure. So
I could honestly probably do something on 80% of your subjects.
I know. That's
Really?
that's what's so good about this. So we're gonna get into Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, the one thing I got thinking about you, Aldous, when we were doing this is when we were doing our core episode on Poe. When I began to realize that not only was Poe sort of interesting and, important, whatever that means, but that literally the DNA of American storytelling is Poe. Poe is like the Genghis Khan of American storytelling. There's a little bit of him in everybody. And as I know you are,
that's one way to put it.
And I know you're very patriotic, at least in terms of American letters. I kind of wondered what your thoughts just generally before we get into some specifics. How does Poe sit in American literature?
Well, you're right. I mean, he is really one of the most important figures. Uh, he's part of the whole American Renaissance, mid 19th century thing. I mean, you have to talk about him, but he kind of stands like apart in some ways. He's not a transcendentalist, although he kind of did some things that were like he was constantly ragging on the transcendentalists, Emerson, Whitman, and so on. Although when you will get into Eureka later, he kind of flirted with some ideas that were kind of transcendentalist. And yeah, it seems like you need to take a stance on him one way or the other. Um, Henry James said, I don't have the exact quote, but he basically laid down a line that's kind of dogged Poe among critics for a long time, that basically an affection for Poe is like the sign of like an immature mind or like stunted development or something like that, right? But then and T.S. Eliot, these are American modernist writers who were kind of like half American, half English in a lot of ways. And so they didn't have the like that pure American patriotism the way I and you boys have, but Eliot said that basically reiterated what Henry James thought, but then also added like a little asterisk that one can never be too sure that one hasn't been influenced by Poe, nevertheless. And I think that's got to be true. He's just he sort of forms the background of so many things, and just vastly influential, not just in literature even, and not just in American literature. Obviously, he took off hugely in France as the result of Baudelaire's. I mean, Baudelaire hailed him as his master. Baudelaire translated Poe, and he really set off the symbolist movement there. Right. And so even my podcast, The Forest of Symbols, I take my title from a Baudelaire poem called Correspondences. And so that even is indirectly comes from Poe. And so, yeah, there's been, in a way, Poe is ubiquitous, but I think he's also like his own purloined letter, sort of hidden in plain sight in a way that everybody knows him. And yet I feel like he's not understood and not appreciated. And in some ways, you've dealt with some other people who are probably victim of the same thing, of the American school curriculum. I think Fitzgerald probably fits into that, of you get assigned it in like, 8th grade or whatever. And so for kids, it's often something that teachers are pushing on you. And so it's not that cool. And for, people who are trying to be more highbrow, it's like kid stuff, right? These like spooky stories, there's like the goth, late romantic, woe is me kind of poetry, but and also one of my favorite critics, unfortunately, Harold Bloom. I love Bloom, but he was always ragging on Poe as well. I got some quotes. Bloom said, Poe induced nasty and repetitious nightmares that linger even now. Poe is a great fantasist whose thoughts were commonplace and whose metaphors are dead. Now, I don't think that's really fair. I mean, I think Bloom came by his distaste, honestly. I think there's kind of like some sort of gut reaction there. But on the other hand, you have Bloom's mentor, Northrop Frye. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Frye very much, but people should read Anatomy of Criticism. It's really one of the greatest books of all time. But Frye had a different evaluation of Poe, and he kind of addressed the James judgment on Poe. He said, there have been no lack of people to say that Poe is fit only for immature minds, yet Poe was the major influence on one of the subtlest schools of poetry that literature has ever seen. And he's talking about the French symbolists there, most likely. He goes on, the greatest literary genius this side of Blake is Edgar Allan Poe. That's why he's regarded as fit for only adolescents or French poets who don't really know English. I don't apply this to the poetry, but there's no prose tale, however silly, that doesn't hit an archetype in the bullseye. I think that's really one of the key things to Poe is that somehow, I think he was really one of the first great psychological writers. I mean, obviously, I think Shakespeare had a great insight into the human soul, but Poe seemed to zero in on aspects of the psyche that people don't really want to think about, didn't in their time, and don't now. And he just like Fry says, he nails the archetypal realm of a human.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all great stuff. And it's interesting because having that influence on the symbolists, but also so having influence in sort of a highbrow fashion we might think of, but also having an influence on the pulp renaissance in America, the very like not even a subtle influence, a direct influence on what Lovecraft and that whole sort of weird tales folks were doing, but then also noir, that the influence he has on noir. There are few figures I feel like who you can say have an influence at these different sort of registers. Somebody like Shakespeare, you could, but there's not a whole lot of people who are sort of like, are the most high, have influences on some of the most, highfalutin writers, and also like people who are writing cop thrillers for TV right now.
Yeah.
That's where it seems like, oh my God. And literally since doing that episode, every time we turn something on TV, I'm like, oh, well, this is basically the grandchildren of Poe writing this, or trying to. Yeah.
Well, he invented the detective story
It's so
almost
crazy.
whole cloth.
Right.
I mean, nothing comes from nothing. There are always predecessors, but his Dupin stories set the archetype of that, intellectual problem solving. He called it ratiocination, kind of mystery solving sort of guy. And boy, like, talk about, like underappreciated, like no character in that genre is more well known than Sherlock Holmes, but Sherlock Holmes is essentially a ripoff of Dupin. I mean,
Exactly.
He really is.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's all of these sort of knockoffs of Sherlock Holmes, right? It's not even really a knockoff. It's just it's an archetype. It's a deep archetype that Poe identified and is clearly resonates with people forever.
Yeah, yeah, and the detective is always, well, not always, but I mean, it seems to me to be symbolic of kind of the dialectic itself, right? So there's deep philosophical meaning inside this fun format, which peaked during True Detective season 1, the greatest season of television that's ever been made.
Season 4?
Season 1, Brett. Season 1. Season 4 is not canon, and I will stand by that. But yeah, Aldous, what were you going to say?
I don't know, but I was going to ask what do you guys think about this? I feel like True Detective is, and of course Lovecraft, as you said, is in the Poe tradition. But I feel like if True Detective is Lovecraftian, something like Hannibal is more like Poe-like.
I think that's probably true. It's a little bit more directly grotesque and body horror, for sure. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, and then by extension, that Dexter's very Poe, in a way. Fair.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
It's what I know about Dexter.
Bit more of a wink.
Yeah.
A bit of a wink. Yeah. Interesting.
Now, I want to talk about another thing that another figure and sort of almost school of thought that Poe had an influence on. And this is the Edgar Allan Poe to Marshall McLuhan sort of lineage, specifically focused on McLuhan. You clued us into this in the, talking as we were leading into this conversation about how consistently and regularly McLuhan referenced Poe's story, Descent into the Maelstrom, and sort of how much that story meant to McLuhan's thinking. Let's dive into that a little bit.
Yeah. So Descent into the Maelstrom, a story that is actually kind of considered like sort of proto science fiction. Also, it's the story of a couple of sailors who are brothers who get caught into like a vast vortex in the sea. They're actually driven there by like a hurricane. So they're trying to escape it's Scylla and Charybdis. They escape the hurricane by going into this vortex, this big swirling funnel in the middle of the sea that becomes, as they go in there, it becomes very weird. It gets dark and it's starting to pull objects off the ship and into the black chasm below. And one of the brothers sort of loses it. He goes mad. He is not able to be saved. But the one that survives does so by when he gazes into the abyss, he finds, and this is almost like a pitch perfect like definition of the sublime. He is so awed by it that he loses his fear in a way, and it's replaced by a fascination. And with that fascination, he's able to observe, to not panic, and to observe how it behaves. And he notices that it pulls in heavy things, of course, but that spherical objects seem to fall faster, and that cylindrical objects are able to not only not be pulled down, but to be able to ascend back up. So he lashes himself to a barrel, and he's able to survive that way. And so what McLuhan saw in this was the attitude that he wanted to take and that he thought people should take in order to survive the onslaught of media in the modern world, which he compared to a maelstrom. It's just this swirling thing around us. It's like sucking everything in. And the only way really to survive that would be to develop that to replace fear with that kind of fascination. Mm-hmm. And obviously, I think this could go potentially very wrong. But sure. There is a way in which, just like if you're in a vortex, you can't just brute force your way out of it. I think in the same way, it's becoming increasingly difficult to be off the grid, to not know, and they're making it harder and harder to touch grass, I guess. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, no, there are things you used to be able to do to stay outside of it a little bit that don't work anymore, it seems. Yeah, for sure.
Sure, and even if you do achieve it, I mean, as it becomes more and more and more invasive upon your neighbors, you're interwoven into this matrix of delusion and fractured reality, right? You can't. And then you have children. Well, what are they going to do? We can't all be Amish. I suppose we can.
Yeah. But then there gets to be there gets to be the only way to step away from the maelstrom is to step into another maelstrom of isolation and insanity. Right? It's you can either fall into the maelstrom or have no friends and never talk to anybody. Right? There's sort of
It would really be a bad idea for a podcast to start encouraging its listeners to become Luddites. Phrase I always use is sort of in it but not of it. In it but not of it. There's a fine line.
Well, and that's sort of what I think McLuhan, in a way, is McLuhan is saying, is if you can, there is something like don't panic, pay attention, kind of as a rule, an strategy for surviving chaos, whether that's physically in a maelstrom or in the most insane information chaotic time of human history, right? Yeah.
I just wanted to say about regard to the podcast thing, I've joked about and fantasized for years about turning the Forest of Symbols into something that I record onto cassette tapes and then mail to people.
We talked about this a couple weeks ago.
I love that idea. I love that idea, like an ultra rare podcast episode that's only on 8-track. Something like that would be so cool.
We could press a handsome vinyl, I think, right, with the whole liner notes and everything. That would be great.
I'll tell you one thing that I am doing in the coming year. I've decided this is that I'm going back to paper and pen for taking my notes for the show.
Very cool.
I'm going to fill up notebooks. I'm tired of doing it on my phone because
I like that.
Again, getting sucked into the maelstrom. You know, this little black box that I have. Like I'm reading books and I'm making notes on my notes app, and I just check Twitter for no reason. You know, it's just stupid. I'm sick of it. I get nothing out of it. And then I actually have something that like I have like a physical object that even something else could be made out of it too. I could give that to my son, you know, or whatever. I could auction it off to Patreon. Or something like that. I don't know.
And yeah, you put this stuff all digitally. It's all ephemeral. It's all, even if the file exists, you know, I've always been startled when you look at all your Word documents, how many megabytes they are. You know, I got a lot of Word documents and things, and it's like nothing. It's nothing. It all adds up to like one music CD worth of data or something.
I'm actually working on a horror radio play type thing right now for Dark Pony Radio with friend of the show, Abby Lucas. And one thing that we've been thinking a lot about lately is, and that'll come out later this year, by the way. And this is so cool. We're thinking, and maybe I should read some Poe. I should probably read some more Poe to think about sort of like horror. I mean, in that group, if you check out Dark Pony Radio, they're obviously influenced by Lovecraft, Poe, that whole world. But this idea that like online, we're all tulpas, right? Like I've spent now at this point, I've spent more time with digital Brad than real Brad.
Like, absolutely.
It's really, it's something to like, it's kind of makes you queasy. Like the bottom falls out if you're just willing to turn the knob to 11 and just go, wait a minute, all these people that I'm friends with, that I have relationships with online, they're not there. They're wisps, and you're a wisp for somebody else. It kind of makes me feel a little pukey when I think too much about it. Yeah.
Well, you know, speaking of Marshall McLuhan, in my forthcoming episode on it's a sequel to Mirrors. It's more on mirrors, the symbolism of mirrors. I talk a little bit about the film Videodrome, which is hugely prophetic movie, has a character, Brian Oblivion, that's you know, basically modeled on McLuhan pretty closely. And what you find out is that he always appears interviewed on television on a television.
Right.
So there'd be an interview with a TV on a thing, you know. And what you've come to find out is that he's been dead for years. And they just play tapes, and his utterances are so like, you know, like gnomic that it doesn't really matter what question he's responding to. And so I thought that was a really interesting, you know, like he's become this, and of course it's TV, but you know, he's got this like media self that exists beyond death, beyond his like, you know, IRL, you know, meat space self.
Yeah, there's something about and there's something about a ghost presence that he has that and you know, there's hours of us talking online too. There's an element that, you know, if I disappeared tomorrow, there's people who could listen to Art of Darkness for years still, right? And it's strange. It's definitely strange. Yeah.
It's a land of ghosts.
Yeah. It is, the land of ghosts. I'm gonna get a QR code on my tombstone.
Yeah. Who's gonna maintain that link? You gotta have your executive maintain that link.
I have good information from some links I clicked on YouTube that we're all gonna have to have a QR code in our tombstone.
Oh, God. Okay. Oh boy. One other thing I wanted to, I mean, we got so many things we can talk about, you know, relative to Poe. One thing I also wanted to touch on, and you know, anything we've talked about as it comes up here, we can go back into. But I do want to talk about the Raven a little bit. And you mentioned that too, Aldous, is something that is of interest to you. I've been really interested in I'm gonna just read a thing. Are you guys familiar with this book, The Book of Symbols by the Toshin Group? Does this ring a bell for anybody?
Heard of it.
Yeah. It actually,
sure.
I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't know this, interestingly enough. Speaking of True Detective, I got a digital version of this book and then been reading it, and I reference it in different things that I'm working on. And then I realized it actually shows up in True Detective 1. It's in one of their boxes of like their case files, right? So, but there's an entry on there's an entry on crows slash raven. And so let me just read this really. I think it's interesting. So this is from the Book of Symbols by the Toshin Group. Quote, we never grasp the full measure of birds. Uh, their tensions can at times affect us as grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous birds of yore. Poe from the Raven, right? The alchemical stage of the Negrito, after all, was known to the artifacts as the raven or raven slash crow's head, depicted by images of a raven perched on the shoulder of a skeleton who stands atop a black sun, or of the birds scavenging a field of human corpses. They evoke the mortification and the deepest sense of being reduced to the bare bones of psychological verity. Um, let's see. Oh, hold on. That's why. That's a very interesting vortex kind of thing. I accidentally superimposed a paragraph on top of another paragraph.
Oh.
Okay. Consider the progenitor and shaman raven who brings humans into being by coaxing them out of their shell, steals daylight for them through trickery or by opposing the falcon of night, brings them fire and water, teaches them how to sow seed and to hunt, and then plays with his creatures and occasionally kills and eats them. Just so does the crow or raven. Um, Oh, this is the part I wanted to get to. I think this is interesting. So there's this alchemical component. There's the raven is it's a part of the alchemical process is literally called the raven's head. But then we also get these other places where the crow or the raven shows up. And one I know, Aldous, is an interesting area for you. The Norse god Odin's famous ravens, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, wander shaman-like through the nine worlds, prying and probing beneath the surface of things in order to bring the hidden truth to the ears of the god. Yeah, the thought and memory that peck away at our own illusions and pretensions can at times infect us as grimly ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous birds of yore. Okay, so just trying to kind of set up some of the, a raven isn't just a raven, right? And a crow isn't just a crow. I'd like to hear, Aldous, your thoughts on the raven as a poem, symbolically. What do you make of this thing?
Well, I'm really glad you brought all that up. It's perfect. Because people have actually missed this alchemical stuff in Poe. But I actually have a couple real quick anecdotes related to that. Well, number one, if you go to patreon.com/symbolpod and you give me $3, you can be a Corax member of my podcast.
Yes.
And that means Raven. This is the first degree of the Mithraic ancient secret society that has its origin in Persia, but flourished during the time of the Roman Empire, kind of at the same time Christianity was rising. Now, I don't mean to, say what you will about the tenets of Mithraism. I'm not necessarily like promoting that, but it's just it's a cool esoteric reference. But ravens / crows, they do belong to the same family, are symbolically birds of initiation. And the anecdote I wanted to mention was that when I interviewed for the job that I have now, I was sitting in the waiting room, and they had the nice glass table with all the business themed magazines spread out on it, and they had two little statuettes of black birds, one that was facing one direction and one who's had its head turned around. And so I was like, okay, that's Hugin and Munin, because one is facing forwards, one is backwards. That's thought and memory. Memory is backward turning. And the raven in Poe's Raven is associated with the memory, of course, right? He's haunted by the memory of Lenore. And so I asked about it. I was like, oh, where'd you guys get those? Whose idea was it to do that? Because like, what's the purpose of doing that? In a business office. Nobody has any idea where those came from. I think that they inherited it from when they moved into the office. But I got the job, so it was like, I knew somehow, like, okay, I'm going to get hired. Like, this is for me. Nobody would have picked up on that but me.
Right.
But yeah,
this is the thing. Sometimes those things get kept around, even though nobody knows what they're for, because on some level, people recognize it as significant, right? It's just like,
Absolutely.
you know,
The
it's just like, I don't
archetypal.
know. Right. It's just like, right. It's just like, I don't know why we have that. We've got stuff around our house that I'm like, I'm not sure what that is, but I know it would be weird to get rid of it for some reason. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah. So it's like the first stage of the alchemical process. In terms of the colors, there's four stages. You've got the Negredo, the albedo, which is white, um, the rubedo, which is red, and then I think it's called citronous or something like that, which is
Yellow.
yellow. Really,
Mhm.
really gold, the sun. So you've got the turning base matter, which is the Negredo stage, into gold. Ultimately, I'm sure Kevin, you're familiar with the Tool song "Black and White Are All I See in My Infancy. Red and Yellow Then Came to Me."
Absolutely. Lateralis, baby.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
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 Well, and what
Whoa,
is that?
whoa, this is the syllables are the Fibonacci sequence. This band is blowing my mind,
Well, that
man.
song is about spirals, which is one of Poe's favorite symbols as well. You get the spiral in the descent into the maelstrom. That's a negative spiral, the downward
Mhm.
spiral, as they say.
Mhm.
And
God, man, that'd be a great name for an album.
The downward
yeah, it would.
spiral. Yeah.
Well, hey, this year's the 30th anniversary of that album. I've been listening
Wow,
to it. It's very
dude.
much about this stuff. The spiral is a dual symbol. It depends on whether you're going upward or downward, right?
Mhm.
Positive or negative. And the downward spiral has to do with he he's giving into his addictions and his obsessions, and he's going into less and less human realms. There's like insectoid stuff, and then finally like machine. The literally like the turning into a machine is about going down into the mineral level, which is like the
Mhm.
bottom of the inferno where people are frozen in lakes of ice because of their sin.
Mhm.
All of Dante is this grand spiral. So
Mhm.
one of the most common cosmological symbols anciently is the axis mundi. Axis mundi is a kind of pole that goes down to the bottom of hell and all the way up to heaven. But this is matter and spirit. And if you imagine a spiral around all of that, you get basically the worldview of Dante. He proceeds down into hell through concentric rings and up through concentric rings on the Mount Purgatory, and then through various spheres of concentric rings into the Paradiso.
Mhm.
This stuff is in Poe too, but in slightly different way, and we'll maybe cover that in Eureka. But anyway, yeah. So you have to go through the blackening, the reduction to base matter, or to the confrontation with the dark night of the soul, which is the raven. That's what he experiences there. Now in Poe, you typically get this again black preceding white. For whatever reason, he has the two, just the two first two stages of the alchemical process. But so in the descent into the maelstrom, for instance, he notes how the water turns black. And what happens to him when he escapes from the maelstrom is his hair turns white.
Mhm.
It's that old, thing about you experience something so frightening that your hair turns white. The narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym has this similar black-white symbolism where
Yes. Yeah.
uh, he they go to Antarctica and find a black land, and the people are black, and the people are like not just black; they have like black teeth.
Right.
Um,
Right. It's not a racial thing the way we think of it. It's like they're everything about them is pigmented black, right? And the
Black
land
teeth.
itself is black. It's like
the land is
soapstone.
black. Yeah.
Very Harkonnen in Dune. I don't know if
Yeah.
anybody's
Yeah.
seen Dune 2, but
Yeah.
I give it.
Not
Have you
yet.
seen Dune 2, Brad?
Not yet.
No spoilers.
Tomorrow.
Okay, so we can't give it a double banger yet. But
Yeah.
it's a single banger at this point.
Pretty good.
Worth it. Go.
Mm.
It's very good.
And this is
I
coming from somebody who had some criticisms about Dune 1.
I went on the record
Yeah.
numerous times going, I prefer the Lynch version. Now I understand that I misunderstood what he was doing.
Mm.
I deeply misunderstood what he was doing. He's doing a Lord of the Rings level thing, but because the story is darker and his vision is rightly darker, You don't get catharsis from episode one.
Mhm.
He's doing something that's very, very sly and subversive, and the fact that it's a blockbuster is incredible. Two, one is all set up, two is all payoff.
Ah,
So
good.
go.
Cool.
Okay. All right.
Excellent.
Cool.
And the
Excellent.
Harkonnen, the black teeth, they've got
Yeah.
black teeth and the
Oh, and
black
he in the
sun
first
and
one he submits into that black sludge,
like
right? Yeah.
charcoal, that charcoal bath or whatever it is,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
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 Oof.
Yeah. Well,
Cool.
now this is good that you got this onto Pime because I want to talk about Pime because to me, this is I I friggin' love this book. I didn't think I was going to enjoy it as much as I did. It's incredible, but let's talk a little bit more about this symbolism because they get to this black land, and this is after many, many different adventures and misadventures that Pime has survived through. From cannibalism to pirates to all of this, and then it starts to get very, sort of speculative and supernatural as they go down into Antarctica. People need to, keep in mind that at the time of the writing of this, we didn't humanity knew almost nothing about Antarctica. It was a mysterious land. It wasn't something you could just, I mean, it's obvious. It's hard to get into that mindset. I mean, we can just go look at pictures of it, right? But at the time, it was just like, yeah, it turns out there's a continent down there, right? So who
And
knows?
it's still kind of another planet. Like if you've
It is.
seen Herzog's Encounters at the End of the World,
Great
it
doc.
still is pretty odd.
Yeah.
Yeah. I pronounced it Pim, but I could be wrong. I
Oh,
never
I
really
don't
looked
know.
it.
Yeah.
I never looked it up. I'm just used to that. But
Yeah.
it's really a very much an out of the frying pan into the fire kind of book.
Mhm.
I I think that he probably didn't have like a real strong idea of where he was going with it at the beginning of it, because a lot of the shifts feel, I mean, yeah, a lot of the shifts kind of feel, the tonal shifts feel like kind of random, but that's like,
Mhm.
it's what makes the book so interesting, because you're like, okay, this is like one of those sea adventure novels where we witness a mutiny. You get like them, they're starving at one point and they're on a little boat, and then like this ship comes and they think they're being rescued, and as it approaches, like everyone on the ship is just dead. It's
Oh
just this
yeah.
this ship of dead people that's floating out there.
So good.
And then yeah, you get to you get to Antarctica, and you get just like no hint for like at least three-quarters of the book that there's anything that's going to be like weird or supernatural, though.
Mhm.
And suddenly that stuff starts to happen, and it starts increasingly to happen to where um eventually they're like going on a sea that's described as like milky, and you had, I think actually in the Poe episode that you guys did, the core episode, mentioned like the strange water that they
Yeah.
encounter, that's like it's like it's like there are different strands of it that are like different colors and they don't mix. You could
Yeah.
like cut it. It's like
Right.
gummy or something like that.
Right. Right.
So yeah, this is like science fiction, Yeah, he's, the fact that it's such an unknown place licenses him to kind of make up these things, and yeah. So they start sailing on this like milk white sea, and there's like there are like lights like aurora borealis. There's this great mist, this like wall of mist that arises, and then it parts, and then they see a very tall, all white, shrouded figure, and then it's like cut. The book ends. It's like this. There's no more from here. And then you get I'm not sure how plausible it is, because did they ever explain like how you got the manuscript? If
No.
it just, yeah.
No.
So it's like, and then you got like the editor saying, and then the writing stops here, and we don't know what happens.
Yeah, I think if I remember right, I got it in front of me. I think the way that Poe sets it up in the beginning is that he's actually been working with Gordon Pym or Pym to put this together. So I think the
Maybe I'm
assumption
thinking
is
of the Pym's cup. That may be what
yeah.
I'm.
Yeah. I think Pym is still alive is the conceit. He has survived this. Let me just read that last little sort of journal entry that has to do with this figure all in white. Almost to the page. Yeah, so just as you're saying, I'm gonna read the last two. It's not even it's like a third of a page. Quote, a sullen darkness now hovered above us, but from out the milky depths of the ocean, a luminous glare arose and stole up along the bulwarks of the boat. We were nearly overwhelmed by the white, ashy shower which settled upon us and upon the canoe, but melted into the water as it fell. The summit of the cataract was utterly lost in the dimness and the distance, yet we were evidently approaching it with a hideous velocity. At intervals, there were visible in it wide, yawning, but momentary rents, and from out these rents, within which was a chaos of flitting and indistinct images, there came rushing and mighty but soundless winds, tearing up the enkindled ocean in their course. And then in the format of this is the next day, March 22nd. The darkness had materially increased, relieved only by the glare of the water thrown back from the white curtain before it. So they're literally just like going out into whiteness. Many gigantic and pallidly white birds flew continuously now from beyond the veil, and their scream was the eternal tekelili as they retreated from our vision. Hereupon, Nunu is a person that they picked up in this strange Antarctic land. Hereupon, Nunu stirred in the bottom of the boat, but upon touching him, we found his spirit departed. So it literally killed him. The whiteness killed him. He's this completely black figure. The whiteness killed him. And now we rushed into the embraces of the cataract, where a chasm threw itself open to receive us. But there arose in our pathway a shrouded human figure, very far larger in its proportions than any dweller among men, and the hue of the skin of the figure was of the perfect whiteness of the snow. And that's how the book ends, right there.
Great ending.
Right. It is. And, I think there was some discussion in the biographical material about whether this was sort of intentional or he just sort of ran out of ideas, ran out of time. But I think it ends up landing sort of perfectly. With this sort of alchemical process that he has set up, right? The black and the white, and ultimately they escape the Antarctic land, which is all black, by, if I remember correctly, sort of placing this white animal in it, this pure white animal, and it's almost like placing a bomb in it. It kills a bunch of the native, dark black colored peoples down there, and sort of allows them to escape. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Poe is a master of not giving you too much information. I mean, he's one of the pioneers of the short story, the very brief. I just recently reread The Cask of Amontillado, which I'm sure we're about to talk about.
Yeah.
But it's so good in being able to like tell you just enough. This very novel, by the way, is like you get the first example of like a sci-fi nerd coming along and ruining it by giving you too much information about what's going on, because Jules Verne actually wrote a sequel to this. Jules Verne was a big fan of it and wanted to have like further adventures but I just love the
so it continues. Jules Verne's continues off of that.
Yeah, I haven't read it. I don't know how he does that, but right. he did it. There's some talk about there's debate about how much Melville was influenced by Poe and whether Moby Dick comes out of this, especially with the symbolism of the whiteness and things like that.
Yeah. I think there's got to be. I think it seems like he almost had to have read it. And this does not diminish Moby Dick. I mean, Moby Dick is as great of an achievement, literary feat as anybody could ever pull, but everything comes from someplace, right?
Yeah.
And that speaks to kind of how we started this. Poe sort of shows up everywhere. If you know how to look for him, for sure. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the cask of, how do you say it? Amontillado. Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because you shared some stuff that sort of like changed my entire perspective on this story. I personally, until now, thought of it kind of as, and probably unfairly, as sort of a minor Poe story. Personally, and maybe that's because it's one of the ones you read as a kid, and you're like, yeah, I get it. They wall him up in the thing. Okay, big deal. It's scary.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. And I kind of felt that way too, because it's a story about a guy who wants revenge and gets it, right? What's the big deal?
Right.
I mean, yeah, it's gruesome. So I guess I might as well synopsize it, but it's first person narrator, which a lot of Poe's stories are, first person narration of some madman who's going to commit a crime. That's one of those. It's set in Italy during the festival of Carnival. and so you get the background is of the revelry and masks and things like that. And there's a rivalry between a man named Montresor and a man named Fortunato. And Montresor has declared that he will get revenge on Fortunato for 1,000 wounds, but we don't know why. We don't know what made him so offended. Could have been something very minor, something that he made up, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, he meets Fortunato. Fortunato is very drunk from the festivities, and he baits him into going to try his Amontillado that he just bought, that he is not sure is genuine. And Fortunato, but he does the right thing. He's like, no, you know what? You don't want to try it. I'll have this other guy, Lucchese. He can tell me. You don't want to go down into my wine cellar. You'll catch your death of cold. And he'll go, no, nonsense. Lucchese doesn't know anything. Take me down there. And so he baits him into going down into his wine cellar, past his what is literally a crypt full of dead bodies. It's like the family crypt. And he chains him to a wall and bricks him up inside the wall and leaves him there to die amid his shrieking. So yeah, very grim and gruesome, and yeah, very simple. But I think one thing, there are many significant things that we see and are said along the way here. We are shown many things that I don't think we know entirely the meaning of. By the way, the notes that I shared with you, I was going to do it. I had been planning a force of symbols on Poe called the Enigmas of Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh, I like it.
Which may happen, but I'm happy to share all that as much as I can here, just because I feel like there's more to get out of this stuff. But anyway, one thing that happens is Fortunato gives a Masonic hand gesture, a grotesque one, it is said. We don't know what it is, actually. And just to see if Montresor is of the Brotherhood, and Montresor doesn't recognize it. And so Fortunato says, oh, so you're not of the Brotherhood then? And he said, of what? Of the Masons. You're not a Mason? He's like, oh yes, Mason, I am a Mason. He's like, then show me a sign. And he pulls from his cloak a trowel, like a literal trowel, right? This is literally, so meaning like literally I am a Mason.
I'm a Mason, right.
And so there's an irony here in that the members of the Masonic Brotherhood are able to read signs that other people are not able to read. And Montresor is being shown signs that he is unable to read. All that basically, like, it's like a revelation of the method. Montresor is telling him exactly what he's doing without him realizing what he's doing, with the trowel and so on. And so there's like an inversion of Masonic symbolism happening. And as you were saying, we'll go into some more stuff on like the Masonic symbolism in the After Dark.
Yeah. We've got some good stuff for patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Also now on Substack at Art of Dark Pod if you want to be on Substack instead. Same deal for both. 20 to 30 minutes. We're going to talk a little bit more. One of the things that we're going to talk about is the deep Masonic lore, symbolism, and context of that story specifically. I think it's fascinating. Aldous has shared some stuff with us that it's kind of blew my mind, to be honest. So we're talking about that. We'll be going more in depth on that for Behind the Paywall. One thing I definitely want to get, and I'm glad you have some enthusiasm for this, because it's something in the core episode when we were preparing to talk Poe, I started brushing up against, and then I was like, it felt like its own little maelstrom that I was going to fall into if I allowed myself, and that is Poe's Eureka. So let's kind of talk about that. I mean, in a few sentences, what is Eureka? And then we can get more into, what he was doing in it.
Eureka, one of the subtitles, there are two, of Eureka, is an essay on the material and spiritual universe. So that's what it is. Okay. The other subtitle is a prose poem. Okay, so already we have a problem. Which is it? Right. So Eureka is a cosmogony, a cosmology, and an eschatology. That is how I would put it.
Mm.
Poe is describing the origin of the universe, the nature of the behavior of its bodies, physical laws. He talks about atoms, planets, stars, gravitational and electrical forces. But again, he's including spiritual things as a part of this, and eventually how the universe is going to come to an end.
That's really interesting because in my opinion, that is the three components you need to have a religion.
Mhm.
Right? Whether, forget about whether it's true or not. Just like if you're going to have a religion, it seems like it at least needs to have those three things. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Who am I? Where did I come from? And where am I going? And actually, Eureka answers these things. He became very interested in this subject in the years after Virginia died. And so this was his last major project. And he did say that he wanted it to be known and evaluated as a poem, but he also seemed to be very serious about its claims too. It began initially as a lecture that he gave on Eureka comes from Archimedes when he discovered the principle of displacement in water, and he was in the tub and said Eureka, which means I have found it. And so Poe believed that he had discovered through mere intuition, through mere inner searching and thinking, not in an experimental empirical science sense or in a logical deductive sense. He had made a discovery through a secret third thing, basically. And you might think someone who's doing a work of science that way would not do a very good job, but actually it's pretty close to what physicists tell us now. I'm just going to give a list of some of the things. Obviously, these are controversial because he doesn't describe them in exactly the same way. But modern 20th century cosmological stuff, astrophysics stuff that people have seen in Poe's Eureka. The Big Bang, what's sometimes referred to as the Big Crunch, where everything collapses back in on itself, and that's how the universe will end. Of course, part of that, the expanding universe, extrasolar planets, black holes. Some people have even read his physics back into his prior stories like Descent into the Maelstrom and have described the Maelstrom as being how a black hole behaves. And you can see that. Background radiation, space-time, the idea that time and space are one. He literally says that. Many worlds theory or the multiverse, the idea that was common in the time of there being a physical ether, which Poe said does not exist, which scientists conclude also does not exist. Although Poe actually says that there is a spiritual ether. But anyway, atomic fusion. He seemed to grasp Rutherford's planetary model of the atom, which is in advance of the kind of soupy model of the atom that they had at the time. So, you can criticize lots of aspects of this scientifically, but if you're going to back into that time period and looking for a cosmology that looks the most modern and most like ours, Poe probably comes out on top.
Yeah, I think, for people who aren't deeply familiar with the history of science, I mean, this 1840s, this is all stuff that has not been articulated or largely even theorized by physicists at that time. I'm not sure when. I think it was Immanuel Kant who came up with the idea of the Big Bang, and I don't know what year that was, but certainly there was basically no understanding of radiation or the atom in the 1840s. So to be probing along, even to get maybe the details wrong, to be intuitively probing along and coming across even some of the stuff that scientists would later start writing on blackboards and putting in textbooks is amazing. You kind of wonder I mean, some of this is probably through his process of ratiocination, right? And but a lot of it does have to be coming from what we might call vision.
Yeah, fair enough. Let me push back just
Yeah,
slightly. I
sure.
mean, some of these concepts were in the air
Mhm.
philosophically by the
Right.
time, at that
That's
time, and
true.
even the ancient Greeks. I was just looking this up in the background. My philosophy degree is flaring up, Brad. Sorry.
No, that's all right.
I'll get some lotion later.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Yeah, they have a cream for that now.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, thank God. No, but it was Democritus had the
Yeah.
idea of the atomic, and then Leibniz was talking about monadology, this idea of
Mhm.
the anyway.
Yeah, no,
It's
you're
No,
right.
you're,
Yeah, we
but
don't want to
but
overstate that he
rendering
invented
this,
it
modern science or
poetically,
something.
yeah.
but this is exactly the point. I mean, I think Poe's Eureka, like it's a problem genre-wise because it's too scientific for literary types and it's too poetic for scientific types, and that's why this book has kind of fallen through the cracks. Nobody really reads it, even people who like Poe.
Mhm.
But to me, it recalls more than anything else those ancient pre-Socratic thinkers like Democritus or Parmenides, or particularly Empedocles, which some people argue that directly inspired him. He probably did read Empedocles because Empedocles had a world physics that was based on opposing principles of what he called love and strife. They're basically
Mhm.
attractive and repulsive principles, and Poe builds everything based on that. He thinks everything came from a singularity which God willed to disunite and to spread apart. And there are two forces, one which he associates with gravity and the body, and that's like Empedocles is love, and then strife is he associated with electricity and the soul, which is kind of interesting because the soul moves away from uniting with other things, which could be destructive, right? Like you'll lose your individuality, but at the cost of loneliness.
Mhm.
And actually, loneliness is a great theme in Poe, of course.
Mhm.
Why would he associate electricity with the soul? Well, other 19th century writers did too, like Mary Shelley, right?
That's
So,
true. Yeah, yeah, that's a very good point. And well, this now I'm going to be sort of speaking out of school, but later on, McLuhan tended to have what always struck me as a pretty idiosyncratic understanding of electricity, as he has equated it with the Holy Spirit, right? I
yeah, I mean, he said
believe, is
something
that?
about the electronic media. I don't. I wish I had the exact quote, but yeah,
Yeah,
there is something like
We'll
that in
be
McLuhan as well.
we'll be doing
yeah,
McLuhan later this year.
yeah. Yeah, it's going to be
Yeah.
interesting,
Hmm.
fascinating.
Are we
Um,
coming up at
Go ahead.
time? We got to do the Patreon, Brad. We gotta
We
plug the
do. Yeah,
Patreon
yeah.
and hit
We're
that.
coming
Yeah.
up on time. I'm wondering, do you have, Aldous, and if you don't have one close at hand, do we have a good Eureka quote? A few sentences or something? I would love to get that.
I
Be
I
kind of cool.
I probably do.
And if
Yeah.
not,
I'll
we can
cover while
vamp.
you find it. While you find
Yeah.
it, I like the idea of the universe being moderated by like a good cop and a bad cop, or like it's almost like a Laurel and Hardy type thing at
Right.
the core of the universe. Very much what we do on the show, Brad.
Pulp and Slick, I think we've
That's right.
adopted
Yeah,
as
old
our
old old
nickname.
pulp and
Yeah.
old pulp and slick are going to do a live show in Detroit later this year. Do we have a venue yet, Brad, for the October
We're getting
Houdini?
very
Okay,
close. I have
okay.
a phone call planned for Monday to discuss that with someone.
Everybody
So yeah.
stay tuned, and Patreon and Substack will get the details first. You want to come. This is going to be like an Art of Darkness meetup, too. We're going to
hmm
hang out. So if
hmm
you're anywhere near Detroit Rock City, the
hmm
Motor City, the
hmm
the heart of Jets Pizza. Hey,
Yeah.
there's a Jets
Hey,
Pizza
nice,
over
good
here.
call.
Hey, there's a
Yeah.
Jets Pizza over here, Brad.
Is
Yeah,
there really?
yeah, I might have to try it. It
Okay.
looks absolutely disgusting.
Yeah, it does.
Okay,
That's nothing.
uh,
Yeah, no, no.
I'll try it for the
Um,
culture. Go on, Aldous.
so I do have one very brief,
Okay, perfect.
and it happens to be my favorite two lines of it because Poe analogizes at one point the creation of the universe to a literary creation, but he says that the literary creation, because he thinks that things must be organized in the same way that every part of it suggests the whole.
Mhm.
And but the plots of mere human writers like him are imperfect. He says that the universe is a plot of God. God's plots are perfect.
Yeah. Now I'm pretty biased, but I like that a lot.
I also like how you can take the other sense of plot as a conspiracy as well. So
Yeah, right. Interesting. Fascinating. Oh, that's great stuff. Well, as we said, we're gonna come back for Patreon supporters and Substack supporters. We're gonna come back. We're gonna talk another, bit of time, 20 to 30 minutes at least. And we're gonna talk more about the Masonic context of particularly the cask of Amontillado. But also the more general context of Masonry historically and in America, which I think is really interesting. And if you're hearing this and you're kind of raising your eyebrows and going, "What is this conspiracy nonsense?" Just hold on, like,
It's a
yeah,
real thing. It's a
it's a
real thing.
totally real thing,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
especially in the 18th and 19th century. So we're going to talk about that. And then I think we'll have a few other things that we'll kind of pick up along the way, I'm sure. So
Mhm.
do subscribe and join us there. Of course, when you do that, you get that bonus content that we do for every single episode. You also get access to the book club. Next, we're reading a little play called Hamlet, you may have heard of, for the book club,
Yeah, that's
and
going to be
watching
fun.
the Kenneth
We're
Branagh
going to watch the
film
Brana. Yeah. We
interpretation.
had such a good time at the last book club too. It was so fun.
It was great. It was great. And you also will get periodic watch parties coming up next week. We're bringing the great Ben Thomas on, who has joined us for the H.P. Lovecraft and other episodes, and we're gonna watch David Lynch's Dune. We're gonna
The
watch. We're gonna hang out.
definitive
Yeah,
rendition of Frank Herbert's masterpiece,
right.
David Lynch's Dune. The most
So that's.
exquisite, the reason we have the greatest coloring book that's ever
Oh
been
yeah,
created.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Dude, if
So
crypto
that's.
really, really blows off, I'm ordering a copy. I'm ordering a copy. It's $100,
It's not bad.
untouched.
It's
I
not
might
bad.
color it in myself.
Bold choice. You get some. You'd
And
get some. You'd get some traction on Twitter if you did that, though,
listen,
for sure.
that's what I could do is I could color the Dune coloring book and post it once a day. See, nothing matters but the bit, Brad. You got
That's
to
right.
stick to the
That's
bit.
right.
You can't confuse people.
Right. That's right.
I'm the muscle bound philosopher who slunks eggs and that's all I post about. And that's my entire thing. That's all I have in my life.
That's
And
a
I
good
have
bit. You should do that one.
180,000 followers. Nothing matters but the bit. I also
Yeah.
thought it would be funny if like the group of like crows like start their kind of like sex cult, their Crowley sex cult. It could be do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the caw.
Oh, fun. I like puns.